I still remember the day the news broke. The moment that would shake the walls of Buckingham Palace, rattle the tabloids, and leave the world staring at their screens in disbelief. Imagine this. A monarch, the head of one of the oldest and most scrutinized royal families in history, making a declaration so bold, so absolute, that it instantly shifted the balance of power within the family. And not just a symbolic gesture. A choice that would leave two of the most controversial figures of the modern royal era out in the cold. "I stand with him," King Charles reportedly said. 3 words, but words that would echo like thunder across corridors, whispers in private quarters, and headlines screaming across newspapers worldwide. The question now is simple. How did we get here? And more importantly, what does this mean for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? Could the Sussexes really be out forever? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. Royal watchers, gossip columnists, and millions of fans had been watching the Sussexes' every move, from their lavish lifestyles in California to their carefully curated public appearances. Every interview, every statement, every charitable donation had been scrutinized for hidden motives, coded messages, and subtle power plays. And then came this moment, the king's allegiance. Not to Harry, not to Meghan, but to William. The implications were staggering. For decades, the royal family has been a tapestry of loyalty, rivalry, and political maneuvering. This declaration was more than a simple gesture. It was a seismic shift, a clear choice that could redefine succession, inheritance, and the public perception of the monarchy for generations to come. But let's pause for a moment. Think about the human element. Picture Harry and Meghan, somewhere in California, hearing about this pronouncement. The initial shock, the disbelief, perhaps even anger. How could the king, their father-in-law, publicly side with William? They had always believed that their contributions, their sacrifices, and even their struggles would earn them understanding, or at least neutrality. But no, the allegiance had been declared, and the message was clear. William is the favored heir, the trusted son, the one who carries the family forward. And the other two? Cast aside, left to navigate a world where their royal privileges, their public standing, and their own legacy were suddenly under threat. For those outside the palace walls, it may seem like another royal drama, a headline designed to shock and entertain. But for insiders, for those who know the whispers behind the doors, this moment represented years of calculated moves, strategic planning, and the culmination of tensions that had been quietly simmering for decades. There were meetings. Long, tense discussions between advisors, courtiers, and the king himself. There were memos and confidential letters circulating through the palace, each containing careful language, coded warnings, and subtle instructions. Every decision, every conversation, was a piece of a puzzle that would ultimately lead to this historic declaration. And now, with the announcement made, the pieces were falling into place, in a way that no one could have predicted. But why now? Why at this moment did King Charles decide to make such a public show of loyalty to William? Was it a reaction to Harry and Meghan's continued media presence, their outspoken interviews, their charitable ventures in America? Or was it a premeditated, calculated decision, the culmination of months, perhaps years, of strategic observation? Some palace insiders suggest it was both, a mix of long-term planning and immediate reaction, designed to solidify William's position while simultaneously undermining the Sussexes. It's a delicate balance, one that requires understanding not just the personalities involved, but the subtle codes of royal behavior, the unspoken rules of hierarchy, and the weight of tradition that the monarchy carries on its shoulders. And yet, there is irony here that cannot be ignored. For all their global fame, for all the millions who watched their every move, Harry and Meghan had always believed they could redefine the royal narrative on their own terms. They wanted to chart a new path, a modernized, global, celebrity-infused version of royalty that would command attention far beyond the United Kingdom. And in many ways, they succeeded for a while. Their interviews dominated headlines. Their charitable foundations garnered praise and controversy alike, and their presence in Hollywood circles gave them a unique kind of power. But the ultimate power, the kind that determines legacy, inheritance, and historical memory, remained firmly in the hands of the palace. And the king's declaration made it crystal clear who held that power and who was being left behind. Now, let's talk about the human drama, because it is impossible to separate strategy from emotion in a family like this. Imagine William, sitting quietly, waiting for the moment to step into the spotlight. Every smile, every handshake, every wave to the public had been carefully measured to reflect confidence and composure. Every public event, every charitable engagement, was another brick in the fortress of his eventual ascendancy. And then, imagine Harry, pacing, fuming, trying to process a reality where his father and brother have openly aligned. How does one reconcile feelings of betrayal, anger, and frustration when they collide with the unmovable structures of monarchy and tradition? And Meghan, fiercely protective, fiercely ambitious. What thoughts ran through her mind when she realized that her influence, her strategy, and perhaps even her sense of security had been undermined? The media narrative exploded instantly. Headlines screamed about the king's choice, social media accounts lit up with speculation, and royal commentators scrambled to explain what this meant for succession, titles, and public perception. Some celebrated the clarity, calling it a historic moment of loyalty and unity. Others decried it as a calculated betrayal, a moment that revealed the cold, unyielding machinery behind the public face of royalty. And for Harry and Meghan, every reaction was amplified, a reminder that the world was watching, judging, and interpreting their every move. Yet, behind the cameras and microphones, the palace itself was in turmoil. Courtiers whispered in corridors, advisors debated strategy, and even some long-standing members of the staff were caught off guard by the boldness of the king's declaration. It was a ripple that became a wave, reaching every corner of the institution and forcing everyone to reconsider loyalties, alignments, and future possibilities. Who would support William? Who would side with Harry and Meghan? And more importantly, how would this choice affect the next generation of royals, the children who were watching their parents and grandparents' every move? But there is more beneath the surface than public appearances and media narratives. According to sources close to the family, the declaration was not merely a statement of preference. It was backed by detailed plans, contingency measures, and even subtle punitive strategies designed to marginalize the Sussexes without creating overt scandal. Certain privileges were quietly revoked, invitations rescinded, and responsibilities reassigned, all in a way that maintained appearances but sent a clear message. The Sussexes' influence within the family was diminishing, and their opportunities for future involvement were shrinking by the day. And here's the kicker. Even as Harry and Meghan absorbed the news, there were whispers of a final, shocking revelation yet to be made public. Something that would redefine not just their personal standing, but their historical place in the monarchy. Leaked communications, internal memos, and private recordings hinted at a plan so audacious, so calculated, that it could rewrite the narrative for generations. And while the public only saw the surface, the declaration, the headlines, the outrage, insiders knew there was a far more dramatic story unfolding behind the velvet curtains. So, what happened in those critical hours immediately following the declaration? How did the Sussexes respond? And what were the immediate implications for William and Charles? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for the future of the monarchy itself? In this video, we are going to peel back every layer of the story. We will explore the private conversations, the emotional fallout, the strategic moves, and the shocking revelations that the public has yet to fully grasp. You will see how loyalty, betrayal, power, and emotion collide in ways that are both deeply human and profoundly consequential. But before we get there, let me ask you this. Have you ever witnessed a family divided by power, ambition, and love in such a public way? Have you seen the raw, unfiltered consequences when loyalty is declared so publicly that it leaves others scrambling in its wake? Keep watching, because what comes next will reveal moments of drama, heartbreak, and intrigue that no royal watcher could have predicted. And the first chapter will take you inside the palace, moments before the declaration, to witness the tensions, the whispers, and the strategies that set this historic choice in motion. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be in the room when a decision is made that will change the lives of millions? Imagine the tension, the whispered conversations, the subtle glances exchanged across an ornate table in a room filled with history and expectation. That was the scene at Buckingham Palace the day King Charles decided to make his allegiance to William crystal clear. It wasn't just a statement. It was a carefully orchestrated declaration, a strategic masterstroke, and for Harry and Meghan, it was the moment their world began to unravel. The palace corridors were unusually quiet that morning, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Advisors shuffled documents, courtiers whispered in hushed tones, and the very air seemed charged with anticipation. No one dared to break the silence. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Every eye was on the king, every mind waiting for the words that would determine the course of the family's future. Charles, however, remained calm, almost unnervingly so. His composure was a mask, but beneath it was the calculating mind of a man who had spent decades navigating the complexities of royalty, diplomacy, and public perception. William sat across from his father, hands folded, eyes steady, but inside he was acutely aware of the stakes. This was not merely about titles or protocol. It was about trust, loyalty, and history itself. He had spent years positioning himself not just as the heir to the throne, but as a stabilizing force within the family. Every public appearance, every carefully curated gesture of responsibility, every quiet conversation with senior advisors had been a piece of a larger strategy, and now it was time for the payoff. But what of Harry and Meghan? What were they doing while this quiet storm brewed behind the palace doors? They were thousands of miles away, yes, but their influence and ambitions loomed large. In California, they had crafted a life that was almost entirely independent of the monarchy, yet still tethered to it in ways they could not fully control. Interviews, charitable projects, and strategic media appearances had kept them relevant. But relevance, as the palace knew, was not the same as influence. And influence, in the royal world, is what truly matters. The king's advisors had briefed him thoroughly. They laid out every possible scenario, from public backlash to private fallout. They reminded him of Harry and Meghan's history, the dramatic interviews, the controversial statements, the perceived slights. But they also reminded him of William's steadiness, his loyalty, and his unshakable dedication to the institution. The choice, they argued, was clear, yet the personal stakes could not be ignored. Would siding with William deepen the rift, or would it finally stabilize the monarchy? Could a single declaration truly define the future of the family? Charles leaned back, fingers lightly touching the edge of the table. "We need clarity," he said, his voice measured. "We need to make our position known. The world is watching, and we cannot afford ambiguity." His words were simple, but their implications were monumental. Every advisor in the room understood the meaning. A choice was being made, and it would be absolute. William's own strategy was subtle but decisive. He had spent years cultivating allies within the palace, people whose loyalty was unwavering. He knew who could be trusted, who could be swayed, and who would inevitably leak information. Every conversation he had had over the past months, every smile and handshake, every event he attended, had been calculated to position him as the rightful, capable heir. And now, with his father's eyes upon him, he felt the weight of responsibility, the crushing expectation to not just meet the moment, but to seize it. Meanwhile, Harry was not idle. Though far away, he had been in contact with a select group of advisors and allies. His strategy, however, was reactive rather than proactive. He relied on instinct, on emotion, on the hope that loyalty and family bonds would override the political maneuvering of the palace. Meghan, ever ambitious and protective, had her own approach. She had spent countless hours planning media campaigns, managing public perception, and building a narrative that positioned them as victims of circumstance rather than actors in their own story. But the palace operates on a different set of rules, subtle, unyielding, and unforgiving. As the day progressed, the tension inside the palace reached a crescendo. Meetings that seemed to last minutes stretched into hours. Advisors came and went, whispering updates and recommendations. Courtiers exchanged subtle nods and knowing looks. Every movement, every word, every silence was analyzed, interpreted, and reinterpreted. And all the while, the king remained calm, deliberate, his mind moving several steps ahead of everyone else. Then came the moment. The conversation that would later be described in hushed tones, in leaked memos, and in retrospective accounts as the turning point. Charles, with measured authority, leaned forward and addressed the room. "I stand with William." 3 words, uttered with clarity, with weight, with irrevocable intent. The effect was instantaneous. William's expression remained composed, but a quiet satisfaction flickered across his face. Others in the room shifted in their seats, some relieved, others apprehensive. And somewhere, in that carefully controlled moment, the die was cast. But the declaration was more than symbolic. It came with directives, subtle but unmistakable instructions that would realign influence within the palace. Privileges would be reassigned, responsibilities redistributed, invitations reconsidered. The message was clear: the king's loyalty was with William, and those who had sought influence outside of this alignment, namely Harry and Meghan, would face growing obstacles. It was a move that was both strategic and personal, calculated to strengthen William's position while gradually marginalizing the Sussexes. The reaction outside the palace was almost immediate. Media outlets, long primed for controversy, began to speculate. Headlines formed before the ink had dried. King Charles backs William, Sussexes sidelined, monarchy reorganized, allegiance declared, royal fallout as Sussexes lose favor. Social media erupted, with millions weighing in, sharing, commenting, and debating. But the palace remained calm, as if the storm outside mattered little compared to the maneuvering within. Yet, even as the announcement circulated, there was unease. The declaration was final, yes, but it also created ripples that no one could fully control. Allies who had been quietly supporting Harry and Meghan reconsidered their positions. Courtiers who had remained neutral felt pressure to choose sides. And most importantly, the Sussexes themselves were forced to confront a reality they had long avoided. The monarchy's favor, once assumed to be theirs by virtue of birth and marriage, could not be commanded or negotiated. It had to be earned, and at that moment, it was not theirs. What made this decision even more extraordinary was the subtlety of its execution. Charles did not publicly shame Harry or Meghan. He did not make accusations or accusations. Instead, he wielded power quietly, deliberately, in a way that spoke volumes without a single overt insult. And that, perhaps, made it even more devastating for the Sussexes. They were not publicly humiliated, but privately, strategically, and irrevocably sidelined. Every advisor, every message, every action from that point forward would reinforce this reality. By the end of that day, the palace had changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in the undercurrents of loyalty, trust, and influence. William's position was solidified. Charles's intentions were unmistakable. And Harry and Meghan, thousands of miles away, were confronted with the truth. They had lost the first battle in a war they did not fully understand was already underway. And yet, even in this moment of clarity, there were questions. What would the public think? How would Harry and Meghan respond? Could they rebuild their influence outside the palace? Or would this be the beginning of a slow, irreversible marginalization? Every advisor in the room knew that the declaration was just the first step in a long series of maneuvers, each one designed to reinforce the message that loyalty to William was paramount, and any divergence from that path would come at a cost. And as night fell over Buckingham, a quiet realization settled over the palace staff and royal aides alike. History had been made. Allegiances had shifted, power had been consolidated, and the stage was set for a fallout that would reverberate not just across the royal family, but across the world. And somewhere, far from the palace, Harry and Meghan were receiving the news, their lives about to be changed in ways they had never imagined. But what came next? The immediate response, the whispered strategies, and the private communications that would define the next chapter of this unfolding royal drama would shock even those who thought they understood the monarchy best. Could it have been avoided? Could Harry and Meghan have shifted the tide back in their favor, or was this moment always inevitable? Imagine sitting thousands of miles away, scrolling through messages from aides, reading headlines screaming about your family being realigned, and realizing that everything you've built, every carefully timed interview, every charitable endeavor, every attempt to carve out influence, could unravel in a single day. That was Harry and Meghan's reality in the hours after King Charles's declaration. When the news hit California, Harry felt it first. a tightness in his chest, a sinking pit of dread that had little to do with pride and everything to do with the collapse of control. He had always known that William was the heir apparent, the favored son, but he had never imagined that the king's allegiance would be so publicly, unambiguously declared. This wasn't a subtle shift. It wasn't a quiet redirection of influence. It was a full-on, unmistakable declaration. William is the trusted son, the one with authority and the crown's favor. And they? They were outsiders, at least in the eyes of the monarchy that mattered most. Meghan, on the other hand, reacted differently. Her mind immediately went into overdrive, calculating strategies, analyzing media narratives, and brainstorming ways to regain control. She had spent years crafting a public image that balanced celebrity influence with humanitarian credibility. She knew the cameras would be watching, ready to pounce on any misstep. But for the first time, the rules had changed, and she had to adjust instantly. The king's declaration wasn't just a slight against her husband. It was a challenge to her ability to maneuver, to influence, and to maintain relevance. And Meghan, ever ambitious, wasn't about to go quietly. They convened with their closest advisors, a small circle of loyal strategists who had long navigated their media empire, family affairs, and public relations campaigns. The room was tense, charged with urgency. Every word was scrutinized, every recommendation weighed for consequences. The advisors laid out the options: counter the declaration publicly, attempt to negotiate privately with palace insiders, or double down on their independent ventures and wait for the storm to pass. Each option had risks, but in that moment, every risk carried the potential for disaster. Harry's first instinct was confrontation. He wanted to make calls, demand meetings, and confront the king and William directly. But Meghan cautioned patience. "We can't act out of emotion," she reminded him, her voice steady yet laced with the tension she herself felt. "Every move we make is going to be scrutinized. Every misstep is a headline. We have to think 3 steps ahead." Her words were sharp, deliberate, and practical. But in the back of their minds, both knew that time was against them. The longer they hesitated, the stronger William and Charles's position became. Meanwhile, the media had already begun to dissect the announcement. Royal correspondents speculated on what this meant for succession, public perception, and the couple's ongoing projects. Headlines questioned the future of Harry and Meghan's involvement in royal duties, their financial independence, and even their influence over charitable organizations connected to the monarchy. Social media users debated fiercely, some defending the Sussexes, others praising Charles's decisive alignment with William. But for Harry and Meghan, every reaction, positive or negative, was another reminder of how precarious their position had become. Desperation began to creep in. Harry, who had always been the more impulsive of the two, struggled to maintain composure. Every call from an ally, every text from an advisor, brought news of shifting loyalties and strategic pressure. Meghan, conversely, focused on optics, drafting potential responses and anticipating headlines that might damage their public image. Together, they were in a precarious balance, trying to hold the family together while navigating the palace politics that had always been largely invisible to them. The first critical decision was whether to respond publicly. Their advisors suggested several approaches. An emotional statement emphasizing family bonds, a more strategic announcement reinforcing their ongoing charitable work, or silence, allowing the story to fade while they regrouped. Each option carried weight. Speak too soon, and they risked inflaming tensions. Remain silent too long, and the public perception could solidify against them. The clock was ticking, and with every passing minute, William and Charles's position strengthened. In private communications, Harry began reaching out to select palace insiders, those who had historically been sympathetic or neutral. He hoped to find allies who could mediate, offer perspective, or even quietly influence Charles's stance. Yet what he encountered was both unexpected and deeply unsettling. Many who had once expressed support for him were hesitant to act. Loyalty within the palace, he realized, was not guaranteed. It was a currency carefully balanced against power, perception, and tradition. And in this case, the currency had been spent decisively in favor of William. Meghan, meanwhile, explored public channels, considering interviews, op-eds, and social media posts that might shape the narrative in their favor. She understood that narrative control was essential. If the palace had won the first battle of influence, she intended to win the next, the battle for public opinion. Every phrase, every photo, every statement was scrutinized for impact. But she also knew that the palace had its own carefully managed channels and loyalists in the media, ready to counter any move she made. Every action had a reaction, and the reaction would almost certainly be public, strategic, and relentless. As the hours turned into days, Harry and Meghan began to realize that their options were narrowing. The declaration by Charles was not just symbolic. It came with subtle, practical consequences. Invitations to key events were rescinded. Opportunities for public appearances in the UK were quietly denied. Relationships with charitable boards and royal-linked organizations became more complicated. Every attempt to assert influence outside the palace walls was met with resistance, either overtly or subtly, demonstrating the reach of the king's decision. Yet, even in this state of mounting pressure, both Harry and Meghan explored creative strategies. There were discussions about media appearances that might shift perception, outreach to allies outside the UK, and even direct communication with influential figures who might intervene. The sense of urgency was palpable. Every advisor, every message, every meeting underscored the reality. This was a last chance, possibly the final one, to maintain relevance, control, and influence in a world that had just tilted decisively against them. At the same time, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. Harry struggled with feelings of betrayal and isolation, confronting the fact that even familial love could be overridden by duty, strategy, and political calculation. Meghan faced her own demons, battling the frustration of a world that seemed to resist her influence, while challenging her ability to control the narrative. Together, they were a team under pressure, united in ambition but divided by circumstance, navigating the treacherous waters of a family and institution that had little patience for error. Then came the breaking point, an unexpected message from a trusted advisor within the palace. The contents were cryptic but alarming. There were warnings about certain moves, suggestions that the palace was prepared to act decisively to counter any attempt by the Sussexes to reclaim influence, and veiled hints that some of their allies might already be compromised. The message was a stark reminder that the Declaration of Allegiance was not an isolated act. It was part of a larger, ongoing strategy designed to consolidate power, marginalize dissent, and ensure that William's position remained unchallenged. Faced with this reality, Harry and Meghan debated their next steps. Should they confront the palace directly? Should they mount a public defense, risking further media scrutiny? Or should they retreat, regroup, and attempt to assert influence from a position of relative obscurity? Every choice carried risk. Every move would be monitored. Every misstep could deepen their marginalization. And yet, in the midst of their deliberations, hope flickered. A small window remained. A chance, however narrow, to influence perception, to reclaim a measure of control, to assert that their voices still mattered. But it would require audacity, precision, and an understanding that the palace they had once seen as adversaries now held every advantage. They had one last opportunity to act before their path forward was permanently constrained. As night fell, Harry and Meghan prepared themselves for what could be their final coordinated effort, a strategy that would either secure their relevance or cement their exclusion forever. Their advisors gathered notes, drafted messages, and weighed every possible outcome. There was tension, fear, and anticipation, a mixture that only those facing a high-stakes gamble with the eyes of the world upon them could truly understand. But just as they were poised to make their move, news arrived that would throw everything into disarray. A leak from within the palace that suggested not only that their last chance was slipping away, but that the game itself had changed in ways they could never have anticipated. Allies they thought were loyal had been compromised. Strategies they relied upon had been preempted. And the palace, more formidable than ever, was already several steps ahead. Harry and Meghan's last chance was no longer just a battle of strategy. It had become a race against time, perception, and forces far beyond their control. Every decision now carried consequences that would resonate for years. And as they read the leaked communication, a chilling thought struck them. Could it already be too late? But what happened next? The moves that would determine the Sussexes' fate once and for all would leave even the most seasoned observers stunned. Have you ever wondered how someone seems to win without even raising a finger? How one move, perfectly timed and executed, can reshape the entire landscape of power. That was the reality for Prince William in the days following King Charles's declaration. While Harry and Meghan were scrambling, reacting, and desperately trying to regain footing, William moved quietly, strategically, and with precision, every step designed to solidify his position and neutralize any potential challenge. Inside Kensington Palace, William's team had already been anticipating the king's eventual declaration. They had known for months that Charles was carefully weighing loyalty, history, and public perception before taking any definitive action. William understood the stakes better than most. He wasn't just preparing for his father's support. He was orchestrating a seamless transition of influence, ensuring that once Charles publicly aligned with him, there would be no room for Harry or Meghan to challenge it. Every meeting, every appearance, every charitable initiative had been chosen to reinforce competence, reliability, and steadfastness. The first key aspect of William's strategy was consolidation. He reached out to trusted aides and courtiers, quietly reinforcing alliances and subtly reminding them of the importance of loyalty to the institution and to the heir apparent. Some may have thought his efforts were mere formality, a polite gesture of reassurance. In reality, each conversation, each handshake, each carefully worded phrase was a calculated move in a larger chess game. William was setting up contingencies, identifying potential leaks, and ensuring that the palace machinery would move smoothly in his favor once Charles's declaration became public. William also understood the power of optics. While Harry and Meghan relied heavily on global media and public perception to influence the royal narrative, William focused on demonstrating consistency, reliability, and restraint. Every public appearance, from charitable engagements to casual interactions with the press, was designed to convey a calm, competent, and unwavering presence. Unlike his younger brother, William did not seek to provoke, to dominate, or to dramatize. Instead, he let every move reinforce his credibility, positioning him as the steady hand the monarchy needed in turbulent times. But consolidation and optics alone weren't enough. William had to anticipate Harry and Meghan's moves before they even happened. He and his advisors analyzed every possible reaction, every likely statement, every social media post. They considered the timing, the content, the potential public response. What would Harry do if he tried a public defense? How might Meghan attempt to shift public perception? And, crucially, who within the palace might be swayed to their side? By anticipating these moves, William could preemptively counter them, ensuring that any attempt by the Sussexes to regain influence would be neutralized. One of the most critical elements of his plan involved the media. While Harry and Meghan had become adept at commanding headlines, William knew the media landscape could also be an ally. Carefully selected outlets, loyal royal correspondents, and subtle leaks were strategically deployed to reinforce the narrative of stability, competence, and the king's clear support. These controlled releases were crafted to appear organic, natural, even spontaneous, but each one had been meticulously timed to coincide with key palace moves. Every headline, every article, every broadcast served to reinforce William's growing stature and the inevitability of his ascendancy. Meanwhile, William's private communications with King Charles were equally strategic. He ensured that the king's messaging was coordinated, consistent, and aligned with both public and private objectives. Every phrase, every nuance, every pause in conversation was measured to reinforce trust, loyalty, and authority. Charles's declaration, when it came, would not be just a symbolic gesture. It would be a culmination of months of subtle orchestration, behind-the-scenes planning, and deliberate preparation. And yet, even as William executed these maneuvers with precision, he understood that emotion could never be entirely removed from the equation. Harry and Meghan were formidable adversaries precisely because they were unpredictable, emotional, and capable of turning personal grievances into public spectacle. William had to balance strategic moves with careful emotional navigation, ensuring that while the Sussexes might react with fury or frustration, they could never regain the upper hand. Every calculated smile, every calm public gesture, every measured statement was a step in maintaining control while avoiding unnecessary provocation. The day of the declaration arrived, and William's strategy reached its first public test. As Charles made his historic statement, "I stand with William," the world watched, unaware of the intricate orchestration that had led to that moment. To the casual observer, it may have seemed simple, a father affirming his support for one son. But behind the scenes, this was the apex of a carefully crafted plan designed to consolidate influence, secure loyalty, and neutralize any challenge from Harry and Meghan. Immediately following the declaration, William's team moved to capitalize on the momentum. Invitations and responsibilities were subtly realigned, ensuring that the palace's internal machinery now operated in a way that reinforced the king's loyalty. Allies and courtiers were quietly informed of the new structure, reinforcing the hierarchy without creating overt conflict. This was strategic, silent power at work, a reminder that influence is often wielded not with fanfare, but with subtlety and precision. William also prepared for potential media backlash. He knew that Harry and Meghan, frustrated and cornered, would likely attempt a public response. Contingency plans were in place, with advisors ready to counter any narrative that sought to challenge his or Charles's authority. Every possible headline had been anticipated, every statement preemptively analyzed, and every potential reaction mitigated. William understood that perception was as powerful as actual authority, and he ensured that both would be firmly on his side. Yet, for all his preparation, William's strategy had an emotional component. This wasn't just about consolidating power. It was about reinforcing the trust between father and son, demonstrating unity, and solidifying the monarchy's stability. Every calculated move, every preemptive measure, every public gesture was also a reassurance to Charles, to the institution, and to the public that the monarchy remained steady, even in the face of unprecedented challenges from within. The Sussexes' reaction, when it came, was exactly as anticipated. Harry and Meghan, frustrated and desperate, attempted a flurry of communications, media appearances, and strategic outreach. But William's careful orchestration had already anticipated these moves. Their efforts were countered, mitigated, and rendered largely ineffective. The palace's loyalty structure had shifted. Allies who might have supported the Sussexes were hesitant or had already aligned with William. Public perception was now firmly in favor of stability and unity, with William as the central figure. Even as the media dissected every nuance, every social media post, and every potential scandal, William remained calm. He did not react impulsively. He let the momentum carry him forward. His strategic patience, his careful orchestration, and his understanding of both palace politics and public perception ensured that every move reinforced his position and weakened the influence of the Sussexes. But the genius of William's strategy lay in its subtlety. Unlike a direct confrontation or a dramatic public feud, this approach allowed him to solidify power quietly, steadily, and decisively. Every decision, every gesture, every calculated silence reinforced the hierarchy that Charles had just publicly confirmed. William wasn't merely responding to events. He was shaping them, guiding them, and ensuring that the outcome favored him absolutely. As night fell over Kensington Palace, the first wave of the Sussexes' responses began to arrive. Emails, texts, and messages from advisors reached William's team, each analyzed and countered with precision. Every attempt by Harry and Meghan to influence the narrative was anticipated, every strategic maneuver neutralized. William's position, now fortified by both the king's declaration and his meticulous planning, seemed unassailable. Yet, even in the midst of this apparent control, one question remained. Could Harry and Meghan find an unexpected avenue to challenge the narrative? Could their influence, charisma, or unpredictability create a fissure in the carefully constructed strategy? William, ever cautious, knew the risk remained. And in the quiet hours, as the palace settled and the immediate aftermath unfolded, he prepared for the next stage, the moves that would ultimately determine whether the Sussexes could ever reclaim their place within the monarchy. But what happened next? The private maneuvers, the unexpected allies, and the shocking revelation that would escalate the conflict would leave everyone, including William himself, stunned. What happens when a private decision becomes public and the world gets to watch a family fracture in real time? That was the exact moment King Charles stepped onto the global stage to declare his allegiance to William. But this wasn't some casual statement. a fleeting soundbite tossed to the press. No, this was deliberate, calculated, and designed to leave no ambiguity. William was the favored son, the trusted heir, the one carrying the weight of the monarchy forward, and Harry and Meghan were, effectively, sidelined. The day began like any other in the public eye, with carefully choreographed events, smiling faces, and a sense of tradition as a backdrop. The media, sensing tension but unaware of the full orchestration behind the scenes, flocked to every royal engagement. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered to each other about murmurs in the palace corridors, and social media waited, buzzing with speculation. The air was electric, charged with anticipation that even the most experienced courtiers could feel. Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood was starkly different. Advisors paced, documents were shuffled, and every gesture, expression, and word was scrutinized. Charles was calm, as always, but the silence around him spoke volumes. He was about to make a statement that would ripple through the family, the institution, and the world, and he knew every eye, every ear, every reporter, and every loyalist would catch the weight of his words. William was poised, composed, every inch the heir apparent the world had long been told to expect. He understood the stakes not just in terms of public perception, but in terms of internal palace politics. Every ally he had cultivated, every quiet nod of loyalty, every subtle strategic move in the previous months led to this moment. His demeanor was steady, controlled, but behind it, there was a quiet satisfaction, the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated every move, every reaction, every potential disruption. Harry and Meghan, thousands of miles away, were reacting as expected, with shock, urgency, and frustration. They had seen this coming in some ways, but no amount of preparation could truly brace anyone for a declaration that left no room for interpretation. The words themselves were simple. I stand with William. 3 words, perfectly chosen, perfectly timed, and devastating in their simplicity. Yet, the brilliance of the declaration wasn't just in its words. It was in what wasn't said. There was no mention of Harry or Meghan by name, no direct confrontation, no public shame. That subtlety was what made it most effective. By not naming them, Charles elevated William and, simultaneously, left the Sussexes to interpret the consequences themselves, a quiet but absolute marginalization. It was a reminder that power, in the palace, is often exercised through omission as much as through action. The cameras clicked, the microphones captured every word, and the world reacted. News outlets immediately broadcasted the statement. Royal correspondents analyzed every inflection, every pause, and every subtle gesture accompanying the declaration. Headlines screamed, King Charles declares allegiance to William. Sussex is sidelined as monarchy solidifies. Historic shift in royal loyalty. Social media exploded, with fans and critics debating, defending, and criticizing, each reaction adding layers of complexity to the unfolding narrative. But the most fascinating reactions were not public, they were private. Courtiers whispered to each other, some relieved, some anxious. Advisors assessed the potential fallout, mapping out scenarios for weeks and months to come. Every detail of the king's words was dissected, every nuance weighed against the backdrop of centuries of tradition. The declaration wasn't just about loyalty, it was a test, a signal, a strategic maneuver that sent ripples through every corner of the palace. William's strategy, previously executed in private, now gained public validation. The alignment with his father, broadcast to millions worldwide, reinforced his authority and credibility. Every smile, every nod, every composed gesture during the announcement amplified the narrative. William was steady, competent, and the trusted son. By contrast, Harry and Meghan, reactive and distant, appeared increasingly isolated, their influence waning with each passing moment. Meghan's reaction was almost immediate. Through her advisors, she began to craft potential public responses, seeking to reclaim narrative control. Yet, every plan was constrained by the subtle power of Charles's public positioning. Attempting to challenge the statement directly risked backlash, misinterpretation, and further marginalization. She realized quickly that the declaration was not just words. It was a framework that dictated the boundaries of influence, perception, and access. Harry, meanwhile, struggled with a combination of anger, disbelief, and strategic urgency. His first instinct was confrontation, to demand answers, to assert his place, to challenge the narrative. But with advisors cautioning against public impulsivity, he was forced into a reactive mode, trying to anticipate moves that had already been preemptively countered by William's meticulous planning. Every opportunity they might have seized seemed just out of reach, every potential ally already aligned with the king's intentions. The public's perception played a critical role in this unfolding drama. For those watching without the intimate knowledge of palace politics, the declaration seemed simple and straightforward. The king stood with his eldest son. But those inside the palace understood the layers of meaning. This was a strategic consolidation of power, a quiet but powerful reshaping of influence, and a clear warning to any who might challenge the established hierarchy. The declaration was both a shield for William and a subtle weapon against the Sussexes, ensuring that any further attempts to assert authority would be met with resistance, both public and private. As the day progressed, the declaration reverberated across multiple platforms. Analysts debated its significance, historians compared it to past royal precedents, and the global audience speculated on the personal and political ramifications. Every reaction, every interpretation, every tweet and article added to the pressure on Harry and Meghan, constraining their options further and reinforcing the narrative of William's ascendancy. Inside the palace, the declaration also set off a series of controlled, behind-the-scenes maneuvers. Invitations for future events were quietly reviewed, responsibilities reassigned, and strategic messaging coordinated across multiple departments. The subtle orchestration ensured that the declaration had both immediate and lasting impact, influencing not just public perception but internal loyalty, the distribution of influence, and the positioning of the next generation of royals. Yet, amidst the careful planning, one unexpected variable remained: the human element. Despite meticulous calculations, emotions, reactions, and missteps could still alter outcomes. Harry and Meghan, unpredictable in their impulses, posed a lingering threat to the carefully constructed strategy. Their ambition, charisma, and media savvy meant that even in the face of public marginalization, they might find a way to disrupt the narrative, reclaim influence, or turn public opinion to their side. Every advisor inside the palace knew this, and it added a layer of tension beneath the calm surface of William's success. By evening, the global narrative had solidified. William's image as the trusted, capable son was firmly reinforced. Harry and Meghan's isolation, both geographic and political, became increasingly evident. But the palace knew that the battle was far from over. The public declaration had set the stage, but the next moves, by the Sussexes, by the media, and by key insiders, would determine whether this moment would mark the beginning of permanent sidelining or a temporary setback. And then, a whisper of news from within the palace staff reached the king's inner circle, a potential leak, a message that suggested Harry and Meghan were planning something unexpected. Their strategy might have been anticipated, but the full scope of their intentions remained unclear. Could they still mount a response that disrupted William's position? Could the Sussexes' ambition overcome the careful orchestration of months, perhaps even years, of planning? The day ended with a delicate, tense calm. The public saw stability, loyalty, and a monarchy standing firm. William had achieved a victory, but one that required constant vigilance. Harry and Meghan were left in a distant corner, watching, calculating, and waiting for an opportunity, however slim, to reclaim relevance. The declaration was only the beginning, the first act in a long and complicated drama that would continue to unfold behind the gilded doors of Buckingham and in the courts of global media. But what came next? The private maneuvering, the desperate attempts to regain leverage, and the shocking revelations that would follow in the hours and days ahead, would push the Sussexes to their limits and leave the world questioning whether anyone could recover from this unprecedented royal maneuver. What happens inside a palace when a king makes a decision that shifts the balance of power overnight? Imagine halls lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs, chandeliers casting golden light over polished floors, and the echoes of whispers ricocheting off centuries-old walls. That was the scene at Buckingham Palace in the hours following King Charles's declaration. The words, "I stand with William," hadn't just been spoken. They had landed like a thunderclap, sending ripples through every corridor, every office, and every tea room in the palace. And now, the real reactions were beginning, private and unfiltered. The first stirrings came from the senior staff, those who had long been attuned to palace dynamics. They moved carefully, exchanging cautious glances, adjusting schedules, and preparing talking points for every potential leak or media question. The declaration wasn't just symbolic. It was a signal that the palace hierarchy had shifted and that everyone, from the most senior aides to junior courtiers, needed to reassess their positions. Every whisper could have consequences, every gesture could be interpreted as allegiance, and every word spoken in confidence could find its way into headlines. Queen Camilla, for instance, quietly observed the unfolding situation. While she had always been careful to maintain a public composure, those closest to her knew the tension this moment created. For years, she had navigated the delicate web of royal politics with elegance, but the clear favoritism toward William posed questions even for her. Could she publicly support the king's declaration without appearing to alienate Harry and Meghan? And privately, how would she counsel Charles while balancing the optics of the family's public image? Her advisors whispered strategies, balancing caution with the need for decisiveness. Princess Anne, known for her straightforward and no-nonsense approach, was less constrained by public optics. Privately, she expressed her thoughts in ways that were blunt, incisive, and sometimes shocking to those around her. She analyzed the declaration with the precision of a military strategist, weighing its implications not just for William and Harry, but for the institution itself. Could the king's choice stabilize the monarchy or create unforeseen fractures? And, importantly, what did it mean for the next generation? Her eyes were on the future, always calculating, always anticipating consequences that most would overlook. Courtiers, too, were caught in the whirlwind. Many had long-standing relationships with Harry and Meghan, some formed out of loyalty, others from shared history or mutual respect. Now, they faced difficult choices. Would they continue to support the Sussexes, potentially risking favor and access within the palace? Or would they quietly align with William, ensuring that their positions remained secure? These internal calculations were delicate. A single misstep, a word spoken too loudly, an email misdirected, a private comment overheard, could carry professional repercussions. The tension was palpable. Even within the seemingly mundane staff, the ripple effects were felt. Housekeepers, secretaries, and footmen, those whose names rarely appear in headlines, suddenly became acutely aware of the seismic shift. Whispers of loyalty circulated. Some speculated openly about what this meant for access to events, privileges, and the distribution of tasks within the household. The declaration, while public in its delivery, had created an intricate web of private reactions, each layer influencing the next. Advisors and senior aides found themselves working double shifts, ensuring that all communications aligned with the king's intentions. Every press release, every briefing, every internal memo was meticulously crafted. The goal was clear: reinforce William's centrality, maintain the appearance of unity, and neutralize potential disruption from Harry and Meghan. Yet, even with the strategy in place, uncertainty lingered. Human emotions, unpredictable reactions, and the presence of highly ambitious individuals meant that nothing could ever be guaranteed. There were also subtle divisions among the inner circle. Some advisors were natural allies of William, loyal to his vision and his approach to the monarchy. Others had histories with Harry and Meghan, shared experiences, or had worked closely on Sussex-related initiatives. These personal connections complicated the landscape. Choosing sides wasn't just a matter of professional duty. It was deeply personal, often pitting loyalty against ambition, affection against pragmatism. Every conversation was layered with potential consequences, every decision measured against both public and private stakes. One of the most striking aspects of the palace reactions was the tension between public composure and private emotion. Outwardly, everyone appeared calm, maintaining the ritualized courtesy and decorum that had been drilled for generations. But behind closed doors, tempers flared, concerns were voiced, and some aides even questioned the long-term wisdom of the king's declaration. Was this a calculated risk worth taking, or had Charles underestimated the potential fallout? Were Harry and Meghan truly neutralized, Or did they still possess tools and influence that could disrupt even the most carefully laid plans? William's allies, however, worked tirelessly to solidify his position. Private meetings reinforced loyalty, emphasizing the benefits of alignment with the heir apparent. Invitations to social and charitable events were quietly extended to those who were supportive, while others were reassigned or quietly sidelined. This was subtle power at work. Influence exerted not through confrontation, but through careful orchestration, signaling to everyone in the palace exactly where loyalties now lay. Meanwhile, news of the declaration began to leak in fragments beyond the palace walls. Some of the leaks were deliberate, designed to reinforce the narrative of stability and competence. Others were accidental, fueled by nervous courtiers or aides unsure of how to respond. The media narrative was now intertwined with palace strategy, and every headline was scrutinized by those inside, shaping both public perception and internal morale. William's position was growing stronger, not just through his father's words, but through the careful alignment of perception, action, and loyalty. Even the younger royals were affected. Observing the drama from their perspective, they saw lessons in influence, loyalty, and consequence. Every action, every response, every gesture would be noted, remembered, and potentially leveraged in the future. The declaration was not just about William and the Sussexes. It was about reinforcing a hierarchy, teaching lessons, and subtly reminding everyone in the institution that loyalty and strategy were paramount. But among all this orchestrated calm and private maneuvering, one factor remained uncertain: Harry and Meghan themselves. While the palace reacted, calculated, and aligned, the Sussexes were still in motion. Their responses were unpredictable, driven by emotion, ambition, and a global media presence that could amplify even small gestures. The question lingered in every whispered conversation. Could they turn the tide, or was their influence effectively neutralized by a combination of public declaration and palace coordination? Even as staff debated, whispered, and calculated, some began to feel the personal weight of the king's words. For many, it wasn't just a shift in duty or responsibility. It was a reminder that the monarchy was ultimately an institution, one where family loyalty could be secondary to stability, perception, and succession. The declaration underscored that personal feelings mattered less than strategic alignment, and for those who had long assumed neutrality, the moment demanded a choice. The palace, often thought of as a place of static tradition, had become a theater of strategy, emotion, and subtle power plays. And within that theater, the consequences of Charles's allegiance declaration were beginning to unfold in ways that no one could have predicted. Allies realigned, advisors recalibrated their positions, and the Sussexes faced growing isolation. Yet even in this controlled environment, the potential for disruption remained, and the palace could feel it in the air, a tension between calculated order and the unpredictable force of ambition and emotion. And then, in a private hallway, an aide overheard a conversation that hinted at a secret message from the Sussexes' side. It suggested that despite the declaration, despite the alignment of allies, Harry and Meghan were not done. They were planning, maneuvering, and preparing for a response that could shock the palace to its core. What would happen if their next move landed before William and Charles were ready? Could the delicate web of palace strategy withstand a sudden, unpredictable disruption? Or was the declaration, brilliant and precise as it was, only the beginning of a far more dramatic confrontation? The palace had reacted, aligned, and stabilized, or so it seemed. But what came next would test loyalties, strategies, and alliances in ways no one could have anticipated. Have you ever noticed how a single moment, a single sentence, can ignite a firestorm that reaches every corner of the globe? That was exactly what happened the moment King Charles publicly declared his allegiance to William. "I stand with him." 3 words, repeated endlessly across television screens, newspapers, social media, and podcasts, each one amplified, dissected, and debated by millions. And for Harry and Meghan, the fallout was immediate, merciless, and relentless. Within minutes, news outlets were scrambling for analysis. Royal correspondents, social commentators, and journalists from every continent began poring over the king's words, interpreting inflections, gestures, and the timing of the statement. Some framed it as a historic consolidation of power, a much-needed declaration to stabilize the monarchy. Others viewed it as a calculated betrayal, a public shaming of the Sussexes that had been long in the making. Headlines were bold, dramatic, and emotionally charged. King Charles solidifies loyalty to William. Sussexes sidelined in stunning royal declaration. Monarchy reshaped overnight. Social media, as always, was merciless. Twitter threads spiraled into arguments. Hashtags rose and fell within minutes. Viral videos of William's composed smile contrasted with Harry and Meghan's desperate reactions in California. But the media frenzy wasn't just about facts. It was about narrative, emotion, and spectacle. Reporters searched for the perfect angle. The betrayal, the drama, the inevitable fallout. Talk shows debated endlessly whether the Sussexes could recover, whether William now held unassailable power, and what this meant for the future of the monarchy. Clips of William attending charitable events, giving measured interviews, and interacting with Charles were juxtaposed with speculative coverage of Harry and Meghan's media empire, from carefully curated social media posts to recent public appearances. Every comparison, every side-by-side analysis, reinforced the narrative of control versus chaos, loyalty versus ambition. And here's the twist. Even the coverage that seemed sympathetic to Harry and Meghan inadvertently strengthened William's position.